All right, end of a long set of, I guess, 2 weeks that we have been processing and putting out ratings data at BarrettSportsMedia.com. There is so much to get through here that, Jason, I'm going to let you start with sort of an overall vision before we get into individual markets. But one thing I sort of noticed across the board is we are seeing in multiple markets new brands start to ascend, if not to the top of the ratings, at least upping their game.
Well, and some shows as well. I mean, when you look back at the last 2 to 3 weeks, and look, one of the biggest attractions on our site, BarrettSportsMedia.com, are the rating stories. I know a lot of sports radio people are into it. Brandon Contes did a phenomenal job. I've told you that already, but it's worth noting because those pieces are hard to write. And you try to be fair to all these brands and highlight what they've done well. But look, one thing I want to make sure that is out there for anyone watching this who works at a station, you can't just show up when the stories are positive. Okay?
Right.
I understand you're not going to say, hey, we fell from first to 31st. You don't want to tell that either. But you do have to show some story. When you look at what stood out the last few weeks, as far as I'm concerned, I thought, as usual, the ticket in Detroit was a monster. The Sports Hub in Boston had a killer quarter. Mark Schlereth and Mike Evans produced a massive number in Morning Drive in Denver with 104.3 The Fan. Look, if you look on the Denver story, you're going to see 104.3 The Fan had a great book. They should be commended for that. But I like to look at when I see Nate Kreckman and Andy Lindahl go up 7 times the amount of share year over year, and I see the morning and midday pop 4 to 5 times. That's impressive. You're not going to beat a station like The Fan in 1 year. It takes 5 to 10 years to do these things. But those were, I know that's a long answer, and you hate when I give long answers, but there's so much there to share, and it's important for folks to understand that who are watching this.
Well, you ended in the perfect place because you mentioned Altitude's performance of growth. And in Denver at 104.3 The Fan, that is where Armin Williams was. Now he is in Houston at 610 Sports Radio. And Brandon, you wrote about this. His station sort of had that similar growth where they really sprung up to the top of the ratings amongst Houston sports stations. This is not a comment on anyone's content in the market, but for so long, 97.5 really took advantage of being the lone sports station on FM. What is it about 610 that helped it climb this time around?
Yeah. Did you want to bring Josh Innocent to discuss the Houston market, by the way? Did you see he quote tweeted, I think 3 times that story, but then was talking about how he doesn't care about Houston ratings.
Well, sure. That's what we do in this business.
But
look, to be fair to Josh, and listen, I saw it too, and I was just like, Josh, come on. I know he's going to watch this. Josh, come on. Look, Josh was there during the heyday when 610 was really thriving, and then, Nick Wright was there. They had a lot of momentum for a while, and the station went backwards the last year or two. Armin had to change some things around, and now they're starting to – it's early, and Armin would be the first to tell you that. It's not like they've had this lineup together for 5 years. But
right, and then he was at 790 trying to put a dent into 610 as well.
Right. Innes, you're talking about.
Yeah, Innes was.
Yeah.
But I thought it was very interesting to see 610 take a bit of a jump there, and I find it incredibly interesting just the fact that you do have 3 sports radio stations in that market where – it seems like sports radio listenership in Houston is not all that high, but you still have those 3 stations competing for ratings. And you have seen 97.5 has jumped past 610. Now 610 is back ahead at 97.5. So like you still have that kind of fluctuation where even when somebody is down below a 1 share, they can bounce back and still start to take a hold of the sports radio audience there in Houston.
Before we move on to another market, JB, do you think Bill O'Brien's insane mismanagement of the Texans roster has led to 610, the Texans flagship station, sort of getting a bump in this book?
I'll say this, that probably helps, but no, and I'll tell you why, because so many people look at whether or not this new lineup is the reason or if it's about the content. There's also this thing talk about meter fluctuation.
Yeah.
People go away who are carrying meters. Maybe there was one user who was part of a sample for 2 years and then they vanish, Like, I think Lance Zierlein is tremendous, who's on 97.5. I tried hiring him in San Francisco. I don't think he got worse the last 3 months doing a show, but that doesn't mean that Seth Payne and Sean Pendergast aren't doing a great show too, and obviously reaping the reward.
So let's look at a market that has been pretty reliable for sports radio for a long time, and that is Philly. JB, you mentioned 94 WIP took the lead here again and really had a strong book. This is a market, though, where, look, being in second place, obviously you want to be in first, but that doesn't mean 97.5 had a miserable book.
No, look, the Fanatics got Mike Missinelli, who's a stud in that market. It has been for a long time. That being said, look, if you're John Marks and Ike Reese, who have had to, even when they've won in the past, they haven't gotten their due. Okay, if they beat Mike Missinelli, people seem to forget that they beat Mike Missinelli. When Missinelli wins, they expect Mike Missinelli to win.
Yeah.
Well, look, when Marks and Reese have a good quarter and they beat the Kingpin in Afternoon Drive, that should be noted. I was just looking at our site. I forgot how many damn stories we did.
Right. Yeah.
The game in Atlanta had a great book. The fan in DC had a great book. I mean, there's a ton. Oklahoma City had some monster numbers. Columbus, the fan. Yeah, for sure. They're always a juggernaut. I mean, there were some really good stories. And the only thing I'll say, guys, is one thing that people have to be cautious about. Everybody's excited right now, but this winter book is really about January, February, and March. And the last 2 weeks for a lot of markets in March started to see declines. And with this COVID-19 situation going on, look, if you could duplicate what you did in the winter or go up, God bless you. But there are going to be a lot of stations in a different position when the spring book comes out. If what we've been seeing take place from an advertising standpoint starts to bleed over to how it impacts sports radio from a listening standpoint.
Real fast, because I want to wrap on New York, but JB, you said that people always are handicapping. Is it about meter fluctuation? Is it about the talent or the content? Would you agree with me that if you were going to put money on any sports station's numbers going up in this next book, it might be Tampa and WDA?
Well, it should. I mean, they got Tom Brady there. Right. That certainly produced some spikes. Florida also seems to be quicker to get back to work and, head to the beach. And so that probably will benefit Mr. Momola out there. Like anything, you bring Tom Brady and Rob Gronkowski, you should get some additional interest.
Well, let's wrap on New York City. Brandon Kay clearly won this book this time around in Afternoon Drive. Joe Beningo is a longtime fixture at WFAN. He and Evan have been together for a bit now, but they're the new kids in Afternoon Drive. Right. Like, if you're talking about that day part, Kay is, I guess you would say, the heritage brand at this point.
Right. And Kay also did beat Francesa in Francesa's last book with the stream included for both of them. And then now that's carried over without Francesa there, and it's carried over when they're going up against Joe and Evan. And I love Joe and Evan. I've been a big fan of theirs for well over a decade. But I do wonder where, like, what their show is now at this point. So when the ratings has kind of teetered over towards Kay, and Kay, when they brought in Rosenberg, they started on a bit more of a climb. And now that they have the ratings, now that they are the leader in sports radio in New York, I do wonder how does Joe and Evan now start to pull listeners back towards them when they're not necessarily going to be doing anything new. And that's, again, not to say that I don't like what they do. I'm a Joe and Evan fan, but how are they going to bring in new audiences when everybody knows what their show is? Whereas ESPN, they added to their shows, and that's how they started to make changes in the ratings book.
JB, anything you want to add on New York before we wrap up?
No, listen, I've seen this in the past, even when Francesa was there. Michael Kay typically wins that winter book. That's where Carlin, Maggie, and Bart started and got beat by Michael Kay. He's always, I think Michael Kay and his team are doing a great job on the air right now. And I think there's going to be a feeling out process with New York listeners. Is Joe and Evan a midday show in afternoon, or do they become an afternoon show? To what Brandon was just touching on, how do you change what you've been doing, which, by the way, was working extremely well. in midday, okay? But afternoons has also been positioned as the place where you expect the bigger guest spot. You expect more news. You're also going against a three-headed monster that's done really well and found a great chemistry on the air. So, and add to that, you're a brand new show in that spot, and you have this COVID-19 thing to make it even harder. So there's going to be some challenges for sure. And K-Show is just really locked in right now.
All right, that is where we are going to leave it for today. Be sure and email either of these two guys for the info for the spring book, whatever it comes out. I have a feeling some of you are going to be very quiet this time around. But either way, this is something we do that gets a lot of attention across the industry, and we want to tell every story that people want told. So do your part and make sure we know your story. We will talk to you next week.